Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting Sandman and the Vulture for Marvel Crisis Protocol. As you can see, the first thing I've done is sprayed them with some matte white spray from Colourforge. To get things started, I'm going to paint the sand with some XV88. And this will be followed by a wash of Cassandori Yellow. Once that wash is dried, we're then going to relayer the XV88 by using a dry brush. This will be followed by a dry brush of Tau Light Ochre. And this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Tau Light Ochre and Morghast Bone for the next highlight. I then added a little bit more Morghast Bone to the mix for a 70-30 split for the next dry brush. And then for the final highlight, I threw in a little bit of Wraithbone into the mix for a 50-50 mix of that previous mix and the Wraithbone for the final highlight on the sand. After that, we're going to move on to Vulture and we're going to use some Warpstone Glow for his bodysuit. And for the green on Sandman, we're going to use some Moot Green. I'll then wash both greens with some Beltan Green. While that wash dries, I'm going to paint the traffic lights that's embedded into Sandman with some Avalanche Sunset. And that'll get its own wash with some Cassandori Yellow. As our washes have dried, we're going to relayer the Warpstone Glow, avoiding any of the recesses. And this will be followed up by a 50-50 mix of Warpstone Glow and Moot Green for the first set of highlights. Then the second set will be that same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio in favour of Moot Green. Then I'm going to use Moot Green just by itself to relayer the Sandman shirt. And this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Moot Green and Matte White for the first highlight. Then the final highlight will be that same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio in favour of Matte White. And this is just an edge highlight, so make sure you take your time. Next, I'm going to use Bugman's Glow to paint the skin on Sandman. And for the Vulture, I'll use Cadian Flesh Tone just by itself. The skin will then receive a wash with some Reikland Flesh Shade. While that wash dries, we'll highlight the traffic light with a 50-50 mix of Avalanche Sunset and Flash Gets Yellow. And this will be followed by Flash Gets Yellow just by itself. Once the wash on the skin is dried, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone to do the first set of highlights on Sandman. After that, and before I go any further, I'm going to use some Abaddon Black to paint their eyes. I'm going to do it now, so that way if I make any mistakes, they're easier to correct. This will be followed by Matte White. And then finally, Abaddon Black again for the pupils. Now we go back to the skin and use Cadian Flesh Tone just by itself. This is for both Sandman and the Vulture, as we want to highlight the Vulture's head, but we also want to make sure we avoid any of the recesses. And then this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh. And then lastly, Kislev Flesh just by itself for the final highlight. With the skin out of the way, I'm now going to start on Vulture's wings and the ruffle or feathers around his neck. And for that, I'm going to use some Grey Seer. This will then be highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Grey Seer and Matte White. And then finally, Matte White by itself for the final highlight. Any brickwork and bricks that I find on Sandman as well, I'm going to paint that with Blood Reaver Flesh. I'll then dry brush those bricks with some Carrick Stone. And then for the little bits of mortar between the bricks, I'm going to use some thinned down Rakarth Flesh. Next, any dark metal will be painted with Iron Warriors. For the top of the light and the traffic lights, I'm going to paint the actual light sections themselves with some black, as the electricity is obviously off. And I'm going to use Iron Hand Steel to paint the rest of the metal. I'll also use that iron hand steel just to highlight all of the iron warriors. All the metal will then receive a wash with some Nuln Oil. And for any reflective light, I'm going to use a tiny bit of matte white on all of those glass areas. Next, I'm going to paint Sandman's hair with some Mournfang Brown, which I'll wash with some Agrax Earthshade. Next, all that's really left to do is all of the concrete and stone, so for that I'm going to use some Dawnstone. And this will all be edge highlighted with some grey sear. Next, the rims of the bases will be painted with some Abaddon Black. And finally, I'll wash the base with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. There we go, that's these guys absolutely finished. I really enjoyed painting these guys. They're incredibly fantastic models. They're not too long either in paint wise. They only took around about 4.5 hours for all 4 pieces. But yeah, I've got to say, really impressed, really love them. If you want to see the other 2 models that are in this set, I have got paint guides for those as well. And if you followed this guide and you found it useful, I really do hope it helped. And you want to see more, give the channel a subscribe, and well, I'll see you on the next video. Thank you again, and goodbye for now.